and thank you for joining us. I'm Maurice Dubois. Today we are continuing to take a look back at some of the most memorable headlines uncovered by our own Marcia Kramer. Many of her stories have helped to make changes to better our communities. She's also covered some of the biggest political scandals, helping to hold politicians accountable. And one of those political figures, former New York State Senate Majority Leader Pedro Espada Jr. Back in 2010, Marcia was hot on his trail, confronting him about charges that he'd looted $14 million from his Soundview healthcare network. Espada operated the clinics in the South Bronx for 3 decades until prosecutors accused him of turning the network into a personal ATM. Espada was also accused of living in Westchester and not in his district in the Bronx. Despite that, Espada agreed to come on one of our programs to defend himself and deny the allegations against him. That's until he stormed off the set.
Now, from the CBS Broadcast Center in New York City, here is Don Dahler.
Good morning and welcome to Eye on New York. Things got red hot this week for embattled New York State Senator Majority Leader Pedro Espada. His health care clinic was raided, civil charges were filed, and criminal charges may follow. Right now, he's being investigated by the FBI, the IRS, 2 U.S. attorneys, the New York State Attorney General's office, and the Bronx DA. Here's CBS2 political reporter Marcia Kramer with the case.
Pedro Espada's gargantuan appetite for sushi from these 2 Mamaroneck restaurants apparently ended up giving him a massive case of political indigestion. According to the Attorney General, the Espadas ordered $20,000 worth of sushi, 200 individual meals that was delivered from here to their Mamaroneck house about a mile away. It was just a year ago that I first told you that Espada, seen here hiding from me in the orange ski hat outside his $700,000 Mamaroneck home, didn't live in his Bronx district.
I think it would be a fairly safe assumption that if he was ordering meals in Mamaroneck and the meals were being delivered to the home in Mamaroneck, he was in the home in Mamaroneck.
But the meals were just the tip of the iceberg. Cuomo says that Espada used his Soundview Health Clinic for the Poor as a personal piggy bank, looting $14 million for such things as family trips to Las Vegas, Miami, and Puerto Rico, a house allowance for a Bronx condo so he could claim it as a base to run for Senate, and a $9 million severance package if he loses his Soundview job for any reason. The loot also reportedly paid for Espada's political expenses, including $100,000 worth of political mailers like these I showed you last year. The expenses were never reported to campaign authorities. How come you didn't file your campaign finance return?
Violate all standards of decency. Are you proud of that?
I'm not violating anything. I'm asking you why you don't file campaign finance records.
Are you proud of being a person that violates people's privacy and is indecent and how you approach people with lack of respect?
But that was only the beginning of what turned out to be a very bad week for Senator Espada. Last Wednesday, FBI and IRS agents raided Soundview and hauled away box after box of Senator Espada's financial records.
The FBI is involved. Yes, it's a criminal investigation.
And last Thursday, the Attorney General issued subpoenas to the state Senate, demanding hiring records and timesheets for 10 people on Espada's state payroll who are or had been employed by his clinic or affiliated companies. The Attorney General said this about Espada's use of Soundview.
This was not the private playground of Mr. Espada. These were public funds.
Cuomo's top aide explained the nature of the joint state-federal probe.
On a theoretical basis, the potential federal crimes would be mail fraud, wire fraud, theft of government funds, and conspiracy.
So government raids, claims of millions looted, and counterclaims of a political witch hunt. What's next? New York State Senate Majority Leader Pedro Espada is here to respond to the charges. Welcome, Senator.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you for the opportunity, Marcia.
And also is Marcia Kramer, who somehow managed to keep up with you, even in high heels in the halls of the State House.
He was tough.
Marcia and I have met before.
Yes. Your response to these charges is, if I understand correctly, that it's a witch hunt by Andrew Cuomo.
Well, I mean, anyone watching what we just watched would think that I am a hired assassin or some underground mafioso, this is overkill, to say the minimum. I mean, this goes way beyond the pale of any kind of decency that should be afforded any citizen, never mind the majority leader of the state Senate.
But the Attorney General is not the only one investigating you. As we pointed out, the FBI, the IRS, 2 U.S. attorneys, the Bronx DA. I mean, the list goes on, and Andrew Cuomo doesn't control all of these offices.
Let me just start with Andrew Cuomo's allegation that I siphoned. Translation into the everyday world, stole $14 million from something that's very close and dear to me, which I started when I was 22 years old. It's now 30 years old. It provides about 100,000 patient services a year, employs hundreds of people. And so the civil lawsuit basically says I stole, during the last 5 years, $14 million. $9 million of that, which is in a severance package, which you covered there, which was never, we never asked for that. It was never a demand of mine, never in my pocket, makes up 3/4 of the $14 million. So the question is, how can someone steal something that you don't have?
But let's get back to the charges at hand. Jim Margolin, the head of the FBI, says that because they're involved, this is a criminal investigation, not a civil investigation. So let's get back to some of the things that they're saying. Did you, for example, use $2,500 worth of Soundview money so that you could buy a co-op in the Bronx before you ran for Senate?
Let's deal with all of it at one time, because I'm very comfortable with all of it. The fact of the matter is that whether it's a car, whether it's an expense for eating, whether it's a business expense for eating, whether it's the co-op, it was part of the same compensation package, $250,000 per year, minus 25 to 30% when I'm in the Senate.
So you're
that is my compensation
you're allowed
package.
to spend $250,000 a year on your credit card every year.
No. That is the totality, so he says, of 5 years worth of expenses, which I pay taxes on. I've claimed it. The IRS will know it and will acknowledge that.
But what he's really saying is that the way you pay it is that you get 3.5 months worth of vacation, annual leave, and you credit that annual leave towards the money that you run up as personal expenses.
We're using semantics. He's saying I stole it. And the fact of the matter is that throughout...
Did you steal it?
Well, you tell me.
I'm asking you.
Well, you tell me. If you earn a salary...
But this isn't your salary he's talking about. These are expenses.
He's talking about your credit. He's talking about your credit.
I know you want to double team me, and God bless you all,
no.
but let me answer one question at a time. The issue is I stole $14 million. The answer is that this is a political witch hunt and false accusations. I have a very great job at Soundview Health Center because I developed it for 30 years when it was a shell and there was nothing there, and now there's 100,000 visits a year, and people make great money out of that, doctors and nursing, providing great services to people. And do you make great money out of that? I make what I am worth because we've done compensation surveys, and I make $250,000 a year. Down the street, if you go to Presbyterian at their clinics, if you go to Bronx Lebanon Hospital, Lincoln Hospital, you will find that people in my economic strata, with the expertise of 30 years in this business, make about the same amount of money.
Senator,
I will never apologize for the fact that I was homeless at 16, grew up in the South Bronx, and now I'm able to afford a house in Mamaroneck, a co-op in the Bronx, I pay my taxes, and I'm the majority leader of the state Senate.
Senator, let me ask you,
I think makes up for a great blessing.
Did you use Soundview money to pay? You didn't ask. Listen, let me finish. To pay for anything involving your political campaign. No. Senator, when I tried to talk to you, you got into a car, you put a baby in front of your face so that I wouldn't be able to get a picture of you, and you had your wife tear out of the driveway. The baby wasn't in a car seat.
Marcia Kramer, this is not a mudslinging session, so I say.
No, it's not, but I want to know why you were hiding.
If you want to make it that, you can come hide in the bushes in my house, and you repeat the same thing all over.
We're going to take a break right now. We'll be right back.
Human decency should prevail even on this show.
More with the Senator in just a moment.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Eye on New York. Well, we were talking to State Senator Pedro Espada, but he didn't like our questions. And as you probably can notice now, I'm sitting here with Marcia Kramer, and the good senator has left us. He just didn't like the way things were going in the conversation.
And that was the end of that. Marcia,
Well, it wasn't actually the end.
Well, of that interview, right?
But because here's what happened. The feds indicted him, tried him, and convicted him.
Correct.
And he went to jail.
Correct.
For all of that.
But in that moment there, I was cringing to listen to the man. Did you almost feel sorry for him? No, not at all. But it was pathetic because
it was his version of reality.
Yeah.
It was his version of reality to defend what he was doing. But the problem for me, and the reason why I started investigating him, was because he was stealing from poor people. I mean, the clinic in the South Bronx dealt with people who were on hard times. And yes, it was a good service, but he was stealing from them. And he didn't care. And he did all kinds of things with his expense account. And it wasn't right. And that's why we investigated him. And that's why I turned over the information I had to the Attorney General's office. And that's why they investigated, and they turned it over to the federal investigators. And the federal investigators raided his office. They took away cartons of records, and they convicted him.
Now,
and he did 5 years.
Right. Now, throughout all this, you're violating all kinds of decency, Marcia, as he said.
Well, here's the deal. So it turns out that I found out that he lived in Mamaroneck. So at first, what I did was I went and saw the house, and I saw his car with the Senate license plates parked there. So every night, because I happened to live in Westchester, I would go home and I would take pictures of the car in the driveway, night after night after night.
So he lived there.
So he lived there. And then after a certain period of time, I think it was like 2 weeks, I went with a camera and a cameraman, and I waited for him to come out, and I confronted him in his orange ski hat because he thought that was going to mean that I wouldn't know who he was. So
violating no decency, by the way.
What can I tell you? And he didn't like the fact that we also went to his apartment in the Bronx and talked to people there and asked if they'd ever seen him. And the answer to that was no.
Right.
So where did he live? In Mamaroneck. Who did he represent? The people of the Bronx. That, by the way, is not allowed.
Right. That is correct. That's a direct violation.
But that was just the beginning.
That violates decency.
I was a horrible person because I showed that he did not live where he claimed to.
No, I think you were doing the right thing. Listen, we're going to come back in just a second here. Hold that thought. The judge in the case decides the fate of the once influential politician. I think you know how this one ends. Marcia just told us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Later that year, Espada was indicted on 6 federal counts of embezzlement and theft and was stripped of his leadership position in the state Senate. Here's a look back now at Marcia's story on his sentencing.
When former Bronx Senator Pedro Espada Jr. walked toward the federal courthouse, he had no idea it would turn out to be like the Roach Motel. He would walk in, but he wouldn't walk out.
Yo, you should be as calm as I am. God bless you.
The convicted Paul, the judge called him arrogant, wasn't so calm when he got 5 years in the slammer. And then federal judge Frederick Block sent him to jail immediately. He did not pass go, collect $200, or get time to tidy up his affairs.
We are standing at the end of the long road that was the political career of Pedro Espada Jr., who for over a decade was the poster child for political corruption in the city of New York. Pedro Espada stands before you today, revealed for what he really is, a thief in a suit.
Espada walked into court like the cock of the walk. Even though he pled guilty, he was full of grandiose plans to get a new trial with charges of judicial misconduct.
Senator, here's the thing that I don't understand. How can you get a new trial if you pled guilty? Would you have to take that?
Well, listen, it's law 101. Our constitutional rights are not abandoned when people pressure and do wrong to reach convictions.
So you're saying you're innocent?
I've always been innocent of the crimes that have been charged.
Espada's 3-year legal odyssey that finally led to a jail cell was touched off when CBS2 first reported the fact that he was living in this leafy Westchester suburb and not his Bronx district. That raised questions about how he paid for his lavish Mamaroneck lifestyle and touched off investigations that led to charges he siphoned off funds from his Soundview Health Clinic for the Poor for his private use. The government said he took nearly $619,000, including $103,000 for sushi dinners and other lavish meals, nearly $255,000 for rent on his homes, $35,000 to buy an SUV for his wife, and even nearly $1,200 to send edible arrangements.
At every step of the way, every time he had a choice, Pedro Espada chose himself.
That was the future Attorney General right there, Loretta Lynch.
That was Loretta Lynch.
On this case here. So what's the moral of this story? I think we've seen this before. We're going to see it again, unfortunately.
I think the thing is you should never steal from the poor. And the second moral of the story is don't let me find out about it.
Now, today, what's become of him? Do we know?
He served his time, and I have to confess, every once in a while, I go by to see if they're still living there. It's sort of like a thing, because if we get off one exit before I live, I could just go by his house, see what's going on, see if he's got his Christmas decorations up, you know.
Right, yeah, just do a little reporting on the side. All right, Marcia, well done. Love that story.
Thank you.
When we come back here in just a moment, more politicians in the hot seat. See what Marcia asked this future president back in 1992 that made headlines around the globe.
They asked me that question when I was on the way out of the room. And I said, I've answered that question repeatedly. And they said, what was your answer? And I gave them the answer that I'd always given.
That is then Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton back in 1992. He was reacting to a question from Marcia on whether he'd broken any state or federal laws. And it led to a bizarre confession as he tried to lock in the Democratic nomination for president. So Marcia set him up with this question, and you had an answer you expected or you were hoping to get from him, right?
Well, so here's the thing. I had traveled with him on the campaign, and he had been asked repeatedly if he ever did smoke pot. But the thing is, at the time, that was like a big deal. And he always said, I'd never broken the laws of my country. Now, I know that smoking weed, as we call it today, is not a federal violation, so I knew he was lying. And I had seen him be very cute with the truth before.
Threading the needle.
Yeah, he always wanted to please the largest number of people in the room at the time. And this was like all around the country because I did travel with him.
Right.
And so I said to our news director, he's lying about it, we have to ask the question. So I asked it as broadly as I could. Have you ever broken the laws of any state, any country, anyone? And you'll hear what he said.
He really couldn't thread the needle on that one.
Well, because I asked it, I included every possible permutation you could possibly do. So I guess he thought I knew what I was talking about. Of course, I didn't, but I was just guessing.
Cast a net. I like it. Well, the discussion included fellow Democratic presidential candidate Jerry Brown and was co-moderated by the former CBS2 anchor, the late Jim Jensen. Let's take a look back now.
Marcia Kramer.
Governor, you bridle when people call you Slick Willie, yet the answers you give to some questions may lead people to get that impression about you. What comes to mind is an answer you gave at a Daily News editorial board meeting earlier in the week when you asked if you ever used drugs, and your response, as I recall, was something like, I've never broken the laws of my country. Well, it's my recollection that the laws of your country are federal laws, and the laws governing the personal use of drugs are state laws. So my question to you is, have you ever broken a state law with regard to drug use? Have you ever broken an international law, for example, when you were a student in England at a Rhodes Scholar?
The answer to that question is I've never broken the state law, and that when I was in England, I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it, and didn't inhale, and never tried it again.
So my question to you then would be, why didn't you give that kind of an answer at the Daily News editorial board instead of giving the impression at that time that you had never done drugs?
Because I didn't give the impression at that time. I gave the same... this whole thing started in 1987 when I took the position in the aftermath of the Ginsburg case and the Gary Hart case that we ought to have some sense of what is private and what is public for public officials against people who thought everything was public. And I said that I would answer any question about whether I'd ever broken any law because I thought that was relevant.
But so the question really now is, have you ever at any time in your life done drugs? So the answer is yes. When you were asked at the Daily News editorial board, you gave an answer that maybe left the door open.
They asked me that question when I was on the way out of the room. And I said, I've answered that question repeatedly. And they said, what was your answer? And I gave them the answer that I'd always given.
Well, Mr. Brown, Governor Brown, I'd like to actually ask you the same question. Have you ever broken the laws of the country? Have you ever broken the laws of the state, any state? And have you ever broken the laws of an international government regarding drugs?
No. And I agree with Clinton. Why don't you lay off this stuff? What he did 10 or 20 or anyone else is not really relevant. We've got enough stuff just in the last 5 years or 10 years that you can pour over and get a pretty good sense of who we are.
When you got that answer, what were you thinking?
Well, so this is like sort of interesting. This was like in the first 5 minutes of an hour-long debate, and here's what I was thinking. Well, why finish the rest of the debate? Everybody is going to do this story.
Right.
And we had 55 more minutes to go, and I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be the headline.
It's over.
It's over.
This is journalistic gold. This is what a reporter lives for, and this is your moment. You were so prepared. You had the details, the background, the state law, international law, had it all figured out. It was all clear, and he knew that he was dead to rights.
Well, he knew I got him.
Exactly, and he stumbled a little bit through there, you know, as slick as he always was. You must have just thought that this is it.
Well, no, you know what? I knew that we had to do 55 more minutes of the debate. So, and it were four reporters. It was Jim Jensen and two print reporters and myself. So I knew that we were going to go through a whole bunch of other questions, and we were going to talk to them. But I'm thinking to myself, the press room, they had a huge press contingent down in the cafeteria at the CBS building, and I'm thinking to myself, they're all like already calling up whoever their bosses are and saying, this is the story, you know? And because I knew it was going to be, I Never Inhaled. But the thing about it was, it became this unbelievable late night talk show sensation because the I Never Inhaled led to so many jokes. And I'll tell you a story. So at some point, a few years, I guess after he got out of office, he sends me a letter. And he says, I was wondering if I get a copy of that show so I could include it in my book. He did include it in his book, but he said that I worked for ABC. So what can I tell you?
Exactly. Oh, what a great story. International headlines. That's fantastic. It was 30 years ago when you think about it.
Do you know that people still talk about it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Memorable moment. So great. All right, Marcia. Thank you for that. And when we come back with a look back, that is, find out why Marcia was in the middle of a meeting between Mayor Bloomberg and the former Secretary of State, Colin Powell, right there in Midtown Manhattan. Stay with us. So, Marcia, you've been front and center at many mayoral news conferences at City Hall and so on and so forth. You've tracked them outside of City Hall. In this next video, you're going to see Marcia with former Mayor Bloomberg, who was waiting for Bronx native and former Secretary of State Colin Powell, the late Colin Powell, to enjoy a city staple, a pushcart hot dog, right there in Midtown.
You know, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate it.
We're both in this together. It's another way to praise you. This is very impressive. Thank you for doing this. Marcia Kramer has to get this on television.
I do. So
her whole career is built.
My career is built on you eating a hot dog.
Hello,
how are you?
Wonderful.
Nice to see you. How are you?
Nice to see you. Hi, son. How are you? Nice to see you. How are you?
Excuse me. Can I buy you a hot dog?
Yeah, we're paying.
Not bad. Gentlemen would like one of your hot dogs.
Mustard and the red onion relish. Okay?
You got it? Exactly the same way.
No vale, sorry. Mustard, ketchup, so brown onion.
But I would like you to toast my roll.
Toast your roll.
Toast the roll?
Did he really ask that? Toast the hot dog roll. Who does that?
He's a billionaire.
He can do whatever he wants. Okay.
But the thing is, he actually had money.
I'd like to keep this one.
Cash for the hot dog?
I do that too.
I think he has.
Now, did you set this up for these two to meet?
Yeah, no, they told me he was going to do it, so I showed up.
He was going to do it for what reason? For the cameras? Okay.
I found out about it. I went there.
Perfect. All right.
Mayor, thanks, Mike.
Can I ask you one question?
I'm going to have a few questions.
Bye, everybody. Okay, goodbye.
So, Mr. Mayor, I have a few.
Let's get the hot dog.
I know that I've seen you eat hot dogs on a number of occasions, and I know that you obviously like hot dogs.
I love them.
So, what's the attraction of the hot dog?
Oh, you know, it's just American. It's the way we grew up. It reminds you of the kid. At Boy Scout camp, we had hot dogs and bug juice. Bug juice was what they call that purple lemonade that you drank all the time. And hot dogs are a convenience food. It's easy to eat. It's all about eating. It's not about anything else in terms of social. You know, if you sit down with a knife and a fork, you eat slowly and you talk with a hot dog into your mouth.
But you really love them. You enjoy them. I've watched you on numerous occasions.
Hot dogs, popcorn, PB&Js, count me in.
Do you have other favorite foods?
Yeah, but they all tend to be finger foods and convenience foods. I always said if I was going to eat all the meals for the rest of my life in one restaurant, it would be in a Greek diner.
Seriously?
Isn't even close.
Why?
Because they have great breakfasts, great lunches, great dinners, and there's 1,000 things on the menu. It all comes quickly, it's affordable, and it all tastes good.
You know, this was the mayor who was anti-sugary drinks, anti-smoking, he was pro-health, and now we find out he's a hot dog guy. I didn't remember this interview. How did this even come about? He's dragging you to Midtown for this moment.
Well, I found out that he was going to do it. I thought it was an opportunity. You know me, I go where the story is, so I went. But I have to tell you two secrets. Number one, this is a man who, his favorite thing is salt, believe it or not. And he, as disgusting as this is going to sound, he likes to put salt as a condiment on his hot dog.
No, he does not. He toasts the bun and he puts salt on his hot dog.
He's breaking
a couple
rules. He's a saltaholic.
Okay.
His favorite thing when he was mayor, when he was in the bullpen, was he would eat saltines with peanut butter.
Oh my
God. You have to understand something. He is a billionaire. He's a self-made man. And he comes from a small town in a Boston suburb called Medford, or as we say in Boston, Medford.
Yeah.
And he has very local Massachusetts tastes, and he's not ashamed to talk about it.
Right.
And that's who he is. What can I tell you?
I know, but then he led, they led him into all these different health initiatives, which was really amazing. You've covered mayors since Koch, right? Do I have that right?
Yes.
Not before Koch.
Not before Koch.
Do you have, so Koch, Dinkins, Giuliani, Bloomberg, de Blasio, and now Adams. Do you have a unique perspective on this. Do you have any favorite moments? Do you have any favorite administrations, any times? What is all that time taught you?
I've had so many, I should actually write a book. I've had so many amazing experiences with each mayor. The thing with Ed Koch was, he was such a character.
How am I doing?
No, but so he traveled all around. His vacations, he would do sort of, diplomatic missions. So my favorite story with him was, we were in Nicaragua. He had gone on a South American tour to meet the Contras, to talk about, Sandinistas, whatever. We're in Nicaragua. He's going to meet with the then Daniel Ortega, who was then the dictator. He since went on to be president. So Nicaragua was in shambles. There was not much food to eat. I brought granola bars. He would go to breakfast every morning, and he had a huge appetite. And so the breakfast that morning was this peculiarly colored, almost purplish meat. And I had asked what this was. And I'll tell you in a second. So the mayor comes out and he says to me, "So, did you have breakfast this morning? That meat was really great. It tasted just like pastrami." It was dog.
No, it was not.
I swear.
No.
I swear.
Oh my gosh. Did he know?
No.
Can you do me a favor, just one favor?
Sure.
Can you write the book already?
Who has time?
Let's make some
time. Do you remember where I work?
I do. We read a lot of stories every day, but you have so many stories, we want to hear them. We want to read them.
I'll write the book.
Please do me that favor. Thank you.
If you'll write the foreword.
I'll write whatever you want.
Okay,
I'll write
good.
anything.
Okay, good.
My friend Marcia, thank you so much. And we want to thank you for watching A Look Back. For Marcia Kramer, I'm Maurice Dubois. We'll see you right here next time.